At 55, Barbara Stanwyck signed a private studio contract forbidding same-sex relationships. A clause so strict, it reached into her most personal choices, turning love into a punishable offense. Imagine being Hollywood's highest-paid actress, adored worldwide, yet trapped in legal language that outlawed your heart. The silver screen showed her fierce independence. But off-screen, she lived under rules meant to erase who she might truly love. Barbara Stanwyck was born Ruby Catherine Stevens in Brooklyn, New York, in July 1907. Her early years were marked not by glamour, but by hardship. Her mother died tragically when Barbara was only 4, falling from a streetcar in Manhattan. Soon after, her father abandoned the family, leaving young Ruby and her siblings to fend for themselves. With no parents to guide her, she grew up tough, self-reliant, and wary of depending on anyone. The Brooklyn of her childhood was noisy and restless. Street vendors called out their wares, tenement families leaned from windows, and children played stickball in alleys lined with laundry. This was the world that shaped her, a working-class neighborhood where survival depended on grit. Ruby left school before her teens, taking odd jobs as a clerk, a rapper in department stores, and a dancer in speakeasies. Each job was a step toward independence, but also a reminder of how precarious life could be for a young woman without family support. The era itself was in transition. The 1,910 seconds and 1,920 seconds were years of jazz and prohibition, of women cutting their hair short and daring to smoke in public. Flappers dominated the cultural imagination, while silent films captivated audiences with exaggerated emotions and shimmering stars. Yet beneath the energy was a rigid morality. Respectability was demanded, and anyone who strayed from convention risked ruin. For someone like Ruby, with her sharp tongue and restless ambition, the world was both a playground and a trap. By her teenage years, she was drawn to performance. The flickering images of Clara Bow and Gloria Swanson offered escape, while Broadway lights hinted at a bigger stage than Brooklyn streets could ever provide. She joined the Ziegfeld Follies chorus in her teens, trading her birth name for something sharper, stronger: Barbara Stanwyck. The transformation marked not just a new identity, but a defiance of the circumstances she had been born into. She had lost her family, but she would build a new one in the theater, and later, on the silver screen. Still, those early wounds never left her. Friends would later recall her toughness, the way she could cut down anyone with a glance or a word. That steel came from a childhood where vulnerability was dangerous, where secrets had to be kept close. Brooklyn taught her to survive, and those lessons would follow her into Hollywood, where survival demanded not just talent, but silence. With the city behind her, Barbara set her sights on Broadway, the first step on the road to stardom. Barbara Stanwyck's climb began on the Broadway stage. By the mid-1,920 seconds, she was a dancer in chorus lines, moving with precision under dazzling footlights. She caught the eye of producer Willard Mack, who cast her in The Noose. Though only a supporting part, her raw energy impressed critics. It was a hint of the strength audiences would later associate with her screen roles. Soon after, she married actor Frank Fay, whose connections drew her west to California. Hollywood in the late 1,920 seconds was a world of experimentation and upheaval. Silent films were fading, replaced by the new marvel of sound. Studios scrambled to find actors whose voices matched their faces. Barbara's smoky, low-pitched voice was perfect for this new era. By 1929, she was under contract at Warner Brothers. Her first starring role came with Ladies of Leisure, 1,930. Directed by Frank Capra. The story of a working-class girl yearning for love mirrored Barbara's own rough beginnings, and she infused it with truth. Critics called her performance magnetic. A star was born. Throughout the 1,930 seconds, she became the face of resilience. In Stella Dallas, 1,937, she played a poor mother, sacrificing everything for her daughter's future. The performance earned her an Academy Award nomination and cemented her as a dramatic powerhouse. Audiences wept with her, seeing in her characters the same struggle many Americans faced during the Depression. While other actresses were wrapped in glamour, Stanwyck gave them grit. She refused to be boxed in. She glided through screwball comedy in The Lady Eve, 1941, sparring with Henry Fonda with wit and sensuality. She embodied noir danger in Double Indemnity, 1944, her icy stare behind a blonde wig convincing Fred MacMurray to murder for love. Critics marveled at her range. Whether mother, con artist, or femme fatale, she was believable because she drew from something real. Behind the camera, though, pressure mounted. Studios controlled every detail of their stars' lives. Publicity men arranged dates, staged photographs, and erased anything that might seem scandalous. Stanwyck's independence made her difficult to manage. She was not the fragile ingenue they could mold. She lived in Brentwood, rode horses, swore like a sailor, and carried herself with the authority of a man in a man's world. That strength drew audiences, but it also fed whispers. How could a woman so tough, so self-sufficient, possibly fit into Hollywood's rigid mold of femininity? By the 1940 seconds, Barbara was among the highest-paid women in America, a title that came with both power and scrutiny. Reporters noted her lack of close female friendships, her guarded private life, and her fierce resistance to gossip. She had made it from Brooklyn's streets to Hollywood's heights, but fame brought its own invisible chains. And behind the image, another story was quietly unfolding. Hollywood in the 1930 seconds and 1940 seconds was a machine of control. Studios drafted morality clauses into contracts, forbidding scandalous behavior. For Barbara Stanwyck, the restrictions ran even deeper. By the time she was 55, one contract reportedly contained language forbidding same-sex relationships. It was a clause that turned love into a liability, forcing her to choose between personal truth and professional survival. Whispers had followed her for years. Biographers note she was often linked to women behind the scenes. Friendships so close they raised eyebrows. Joan Crawford and Barbara were rumored to have shared more than professional camaraderie. Their nights together at parties, where music and champagne flowed freely, were remembered by those who claimed to see subtle glances, a lingering touch, conversations that lasted until dawn. Nothing was ever confirmed, of course. In that era, confirmation could have meant destruction. Another name often mentioned was Tallulah Bankhead, the outspoken actress who made little effort to hide her own desires. Bankhead and Stanwyck crossed paths in Hollywood and on Broadway, both admired for their sharp wit and fierce independence. Friends later recalled that when Tallulah swept into a room, Barbara's guarded exterior seemed to soften, as if she recognized a kindred spirit. Whether their bond was romantic or simply emotional, the connection was undeniable. Discretion was everything. Private parties in Beverly Hills or hidden homes in Laurel Canyon provided cover. Trusted friends would host gatherings where stars could shed their public masks, laughing, drinking, even dancing freely with partners they could never acknowledge in daylight. For Barbara, these evenings were rare moments of relief. She could let the steel melt away, if only for a few hours. But secrecy came at a cost. Studio executives monitored their stars relentlessly. Photographers waited outside homes. One rumor, one photograph, could shatter a career built over decades. Stanwyck was no fool. She learned to move carefully, using trusted drivers, choosing meeting places far from Hollywood's glitter. Some biographers describe her driving alone late at night, winding through canyon roads to reach safe houses where she could simply be herself. The loneliness of those drives lingers in her story. The hum of tires, the city lights fading in the rearview mirror, freedom just out of reach. Her marriage to Frank Fay had ended in bitterness, followed later by a long partnership with actor Robert Taylor. To the public, Taylor was the perfect leading man, and their union appeared solid. Privately, however, many historians describe it as a studio-arranged shield. Taylor's own rumored relationships with men, combined with Barbara's guarded companionship, made their marriage appear more like a contract of convenience than a love match. They divorced in By the 1950 seconds, Barbara Stanwyck was one of the most admired actresses in America. Yet behind the applause, whispers grew louder. Gossip columnists hinted at her private life, suggesting she was too independent, too aloof, too different. In a town where rumors could topple a career, these suggestions were dangerous. The morality clauses in her contracts left no room for scandal. Studios demanded she appear at premieres on the arm of handsome men, even after her divorce from Robert Taylor. Photographers were tipped off to capture her in perfect poses, smiling as if nothing in her world was out of place. But behind the images, Barbara knew every smile was a performance, every handshake a shield. She was living under a microscope that saw everything yet understood nothing. Her choice of roles began to shift. By the late 1950 seconds, she moved toward television, becoming one of the first major film stars to embrace the new medium. The Barbara Stanwyck show in 1960 earned her an Emmy. But it was also a reminder that the studios were no longer offering her the same prestige roles. Some insiders believed it was because she was aging in an industry that prized youth. Others quietly suggested that her refusal to conform off-screen, her unwillingness to remarry or play the demure Hollywood wife, made her less desirable to powerful men in charge. The gossip was never printed outright, but it was there in the silences. Casting directors hesitated. Producers looked for safer choices. The very qualities that had made her a star, strength, independence, sharp intelligence, were turned against her in whispers about her femininity, her orientation, her ability to fit the mold. And in that climate, where being suspected of same-sex love could end a career, silence became her only defense. Emotionally, the toll was heavy. Friends described her as fiercely loyal but often lonely. Retreating into her ranch in California's San Fernando Valley, where she cared for horses and found solace in the quiet. The public saw a glamorous star. The reality was a woman fighting to preserve her dignity in a system designed to strip it away. She buried her vulnerabilities under toughness, but even steel has its limits. Hollywood had given her wealth and fame, but it demanded obedience in return. The more she resisted, the more isolated she became. By the early 1960 seconds, Barbara faced her lowest point. She was still working. Barbara Stanwyck never surrendered. If Hollywood tried to sideline her, she found new ways to stay alive on screen. In the 1960 seconds, she turned toward television westerns, a genre she loved for its rugged honesty. In The Big Valley, 1969, she played Victoria Barkley, a widowed matriarch running a vast ranch. The role was commanding, fierce, and deeply human, earning her another Emmy. Viewers admired her authority, perhaps sensing how much of her own willpower she poured into the character. Off-screen, she lived quietly. Her ranch in Encino became her sanctuary, with horses, wide fields, and trusted companions. In later interviews, she spoke of the peace animals gave her, a reprieve from the scrutiny of Hollywood. She never remarried after Robert Taylor, nor did she publicly acknowledge any romantic partnerships. Biographers suggest she had close companions in those years, women with whom she shared deep trust, but the relationships remained private, unspoken, and unconfirmed. In a changing world, even as society slowly loosened its grip, she kept her guard. The 1970 seconds and 1980 seconds brought new honors. She appeared in The Thornbirds, 1983, playing the formidable Mary Carson, a role that won her a Golden Globe and an Emmy. The performance was a reminder of her enduring power. By then she was in her 70s, yet her screen presence was undimmed. Younger audiences discovered her, while older fans celebrated her longevity. As norms around sexuality began to shift in the 1980 seconds, Barbara watched from the sidelines. Hollywood was still hesitant, but public conversations about love and identity were changing. Yet she never spoke of her own struggles. Perhaps the years of silence had become second nature. Perhaps she felt her work was her only true legacy. Friends noted that she grew reflective but remained guarded, a woman who carried secrets to the very end. She received an Barbara Stanwyck's story is not just one of fame. It is a story of silence, of survival, and of the cost of playing a role long after the cameras stopped rolling. She conquered Hollywood with grit, resilience, and unmatched talent. Yet behind the applause, she bore the burden of contracts that policed her private life, of whispers that could have ended her career, of love that had to remain unspoken. Her strength was legendary, but it came at a price. She never revealed her heart, never allowed the world to see the tenderness hidden beneath her steel. Perhaps that was her choice. Perhaps it was the only way she knew to endure. What remains is a legacy of films and performances that continue to inspire, layered with the mystery of a woman who kept her truth hidden in plain sight. Her life asks us to reflect on the cost of secrecy and the courage it takes to live authentically. It reminds us that even the brightest stars can carry shadows. What do you think? Was Barbara Stanwyck's greatest performance the one she gave on screen, or the one she lived off it? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you want to hear more hidden stories from Hollywood's golden age.